Hey folks, welcome to Snowpal's Polyglot Software Development Podcast. Our guests today are Marni Stockman and Nick Coniglio. Marni and Nick are the co-authors of Leader Like Lasso, a leadership book for life, your life. So we're going to chat about a few different things around leadership and running a SaaS business. But before we get started, thanks Nick and Marni for taking time to have this conversation. If you could just give a brief introduction about yourself, what you do, uh, uh, each of you, and then we can roll into the topic. We can start with Marni. That's okay.
Sure. Yeah. Well, thanks for having us. I started out actually as a high school math teacher. And so, as I told people when I was selling our product in the company, that means I sold pre-calculus to 16-year-olds. So I know something about sales and marketing. From there, I became the math supervisor for our school system. And then I worked with an ed tech assessment platform, collecting data across our school system. And it just so happened to be the ed tech company that Nick worked for. And I was passionate about that product, and so passionate so that the owner of the company thought I should come work for the company and run customer success. So I landed in the SaaS world, in the ed tech company, with Nick. As heading customer success. And I'll let Nick take it from here and tell his story and kind of what we did once we landed together.
Thank you.
Perfect. Thanks, Marni, and thanks, Krish. My name is Nick Coniglio. I'm a technology veteran. I've been in technology my entire career. Started out as a mainframe programmer, then spent a lot of time in business intelligence, data warehousing, mostly consulting work. And that really marked kind of my trajectory of my career. I had a habit of joining companies as employee number single digit, really small companies. And actually 4 times I went through that process, the last time of which I was employee number 1 with Marni. But yeah, I kind of made a habit of working with companies that, for whatever reason, we had significant growth and ended up going eventually to exit or acquisition of some sort. And then the last step along that way was that venture that Marni and I started in 2019, which was a SaaS platform targeted at managed service providers in the IT industry. And that's kind of where we're at. That's a little bit about us. We'll be happy to share more about that story if you want to get into it.
No, thanks for the introduction to both of you. I know there's plenty of learning for me in the next 45 minutes to an hour. I know I'm already ready for it. This is awesome. Your experience is lovely. And again, I'm just going to have this conversation, throw the questions. I may not address each of you specifically, but please feel free to chime in if you feel like you might be a better person to answer that. Yep. Before we get to your book, before we got hit record, like Nick, when I asked you, when I asked the two of you what we should talk about, I think your introduction there was like perfect. You mentioned about being founders, and you also mentioned you've been the single digit employee, and most recently employee number 1. So can you tell us the highest level, right? Again, the audience is predominantly technical, but a lot of us people watching, listening are also eager to start a business. Either they're early stage founders. So I've had plenty of conversation with founders, and by way of introduction, really quick, I run a company in the DC Metro, and we have few products, B2B and B2C products in production. So a lot of what you say, I'm going to be able to relate to it. But folks are watching, some of them have done this for a long time. Others just getting started. So if you could just sort of kick this conversation off with your experience, the two of you specifically, to running these smaller companies, being early stage employees, what that experience was like. I think that would be a nice place to start.
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to. And I give you my background. Where I started my career very early on was for a Fortune 500 company. So I've kind of seen both perspectives of that. I think from a smaller company perspective, as many people in your audience obviously probably realize, if that's something that they've taken on, there's nothing like it, right? You're not strapped down by a lot of red tape or existing bureaucracy that that holds a lot of people down in bigger companies. And to us, we've always viewed that as an opportunity. And I'll say our origin story started out with a small company. As Marnie mentioned, we worked in ed tech. And that small company got acquired and acquired and acquired, right? It kept one more time, it got acquired one last time. And at that time, I was responsible for data and, customer support were kind of under my umbrella, and Marnie was responsible for customer success. And it eventually got swallowed up by private equity, and it entered into that world of, it was ironic, right? They told us that their number one core value was raving fans, which Marnie and I absolutely were big fans of. We that is our core value, is creating raving fans. But they threw all sorts of money into to sales, and they stripped all sorts of money from the customer experience perspective, which is what Marnie and I were responsible for. And we saw that kind of clash of core values with the culture of actually how it played out. And that's where we kind of came to the conclusion of, we've been through this a number of times. We think we can do this ourselves as founders. So we were really just looking for a problem to solve. And I'll turn it over to Marnie from that perspective to kind of give you the rest of that origin story.
Yeah. So, on Zoom, you can send a chat, but somehow it felt like Nick was kind of passing me a note across the internet saying like, hey, we should see if we can start a company. And with the core values of, like he said, raving fans. So we knew how we wanted to start a company. We knew what it would feel like, how we would support and lead, but we didn't know what problem we were going to solve. So we were out looking for a problem. And I had played volleyball with someone who was a managed service provider, which is MSP. And since you live relatively close to me, Krish, maybe you're the same as me. You thought that meant Maryland State Police, right? I did not know MSP meant managed service provider, and I did not know what one was. It is an IT business owner, right? And so I was playing volleyball with him, and I said, Nick and I are out looking for a problem to solve. Are there any problems in your industry that we could solve with software? We were looking to build a SaaS company. And I said, Nick's experience in particular is he's a master of data. We're good with reporting and analytics, and we're good with communicating that well, because we've done that for school systems where you're having to communicate data to teachers, principals, and students. And he said, yeah, I spent 8 hours a day cobbling together my quarterly business review, and we should be able to automate that, make it more strategic, make it more impactful for businesses. And so he kind of Shark Tank pitched us. He said, can you and Nick jump on a call? And he got out a PowerPoint slide deck and really pitched us on this idea of building a platform that would automate that. And so that is the beginning of how we started Lifecycle Insights. But the interesting piece was we had the how before we had the what, right? So we knew that the way we were going to grow teams, the way we were going to grow the company, that was the core of how we were starting the business. And then what the business ended up turning into, grew from once we had the problem.
That's lovely. I'm going to ask a bunch of random things, and if it doesn't make sense, let me know. Not a problem at all, right? You have collectively, the two of you have plenty of experience in running companies. Now, as I talk to a lot of founders, early stage and late stage, doesn't matter what. There's a number of things that are common to a lot of founders, regardless of the business that they are in, and there are things that are unique to that industry and the team and the organization as well, right? So I've seen a fair split between, yep, I can see eye to eye with a number of these types of problems and challenges, but here are some unique challenges. So I want to start there. But before that, a little bit about the book. I know we haven't gotten to that yet. So what is the journey from being founders and writing a book? Like, what, to me, as somebody who at least has the experience, if I should say so myself, of building software and running a company, I've blogged a fair bit, but writing a book is a different skill altogether. So for some of us, or laymen trying to understand between, okay, Marnie and Nick are company founders, what does that have anything to do with writing a book? Hopefully it's not a silly question, But please, if you could answer that.
It's not a silly question at all. So have you seen or heard of the show Ted Lasso?
I actually know, I've not watched it. We have Apple TV subscription, but I know exactly. But if just, our audience is predominantly in the US, but there are people in Asia as well. So if you don't mind just, explaining even the show a tiny bit. Yeah.
Yeah, well, it's important because it answers the question of why we wrote this book when we were startup founders. So Ted Lasso is a story about an American football coach who goes to the UK to coach football, which is American soccer, right? So he is a fish out of water, and he freely admits to the press on his very first day that there's an entire internet full of things he doesn't know about soccer. And as I just described our story, there was at least an entire internet of things Nick and I did not know about managed service providers and the MSP world when we decided we were going to start a company to solve a problem for that space. The other thing we learned quickly about Ted Lasso is that he's got some leadership skills, some quirky personality traits that makes him entertaining. And the show lasted for 3 years. Now, I'm going to just stop there and let Nick tell the story because Nick is the one that found Ted Lasso first. And this is kind of more, so there's the fish out of water component. And then I suspect I know exactly where Nick will take it from here.
Yeah, I think a couple of things, right? I think in those same 3 years that Ted Lasso aired, that happened to be the same exact 3 years that we started the business from scratch. It was completely bootstrapped. We scaled it to a multi-million-dollar business and we exited from the business. So there was that timing perspective. But as I was watching the show, the lead character, Ted Lasso, he leads with such positivity and authenticity and encouragement. And really, as I was watching that show, I was like, Marni, you have to watch the show because you are Ted Lasso, right? So many of the things that we talk about in terms of why we have been successful, in terms of building communities and being authentic and, continuous improvement and things like that, they're represented not just only in the lead character, which Marni most resembled, but all the other characters of the show as well. So if you kind of combine that with the fact that people really were surprised at our success, and it was a SaaS company, in the 3 years that we scaled it to a multi-million-dollar business, we did not have a single sales rep that entire time. So people kept on asking us when we exited, okay, how exactly did you do it? And sure, we came in with experience of how to build a SaaS company from our previous experiences, but like Marni said, we did not know the industry at all. But we felt like there was a story to share, and we felt like there was value in us sharing that because, as you said, Krish, we were new founders, right? We had come in to companies and started early on, but we had never started a company before. So we were always starving for information on exactly how do we do this? How does it work? What are the keys to success? And we had a lot of people asking us that. We decided to use the vehicle of a book to kind of just share our experiences. And I think what's unique about it is, we're not Richard Branson, we're not Elon Musk, we're not, whoever the name of the day is in terms of sharing the expertise in this remarkable success. We're nobodies, right? That had a lot of success. And I think we're relatable to a lot of people that are out there who are kind of going through that same process of trying to start up a software company, or any company
lovely.
for that matter.
Makes sense, right? And even if some of these I'm asking looks kind of incoherent in terms of why are they in random directions, hopefully at the end of the podcast, I hope collectively they'll make sense, right? So that's good introduction to the book. We're going to go into the chapters and just get a feel for the book. But something that you said there, Nick, I think piqued my interest. You said you're trying to share this experience as not Elon Musk, right? As not one of those people just yet. Hopefully soon, but just not yet. But I think that's important because when we started the podcast ourselves, we want to share our experience of building software where we struggled, where we've excelled, where we've learning along the way when we did it. Because, sometimes you want to push it to 3 months after, you completely forget because you run into 17 other problems or 700 other problems in the 3 months. So as much as my wife tells me, Krish, on the podcast, try not to talk much so we can hear other people talk as much as you like to talk. I try to respect that, but sometimes for me to ask the question, I have to ask this. So, and I'm not very succinct, unfortunately. So here is what I want to ask. You sharing your experience along the way, and you wrote this book, and we'll get to the details of the book. But before that, what were like, let me give you an example. Let me step back. When I started the company, as somebody who's been building software for many years for different companies, I was like, oh, you know what, there's going to be technical challenges, and we're going to be looking at a wall, or hit by a wall, or whatever their ADM is, right? And then we have to find our way out of that, right? Because we basically got stuck with a technical problem, and that's essentially the type of issues we're going to run into. We sure run into that, but as it turned out, that was not the thing that was the most difficult, because we are a team of people who've done that for a fair bit of time. Everything else that we thought or we did not even think would be problems, we were hit with thousands, hundreds of them, and then we realized, oh my god, writing code is important for a software company, but that's just one facet, right? There's 99 other things that are important that we had no idea that we're going to be and we wouldn't be good at. With that as a foundation, I want to ask the two of you, when you started the company, you came with rich experience. What were some things that directly transferred to, hey, you know what, I've done this before, I know exactly what I'm doing? Some examples of that, and some other things where, you know what, I have no idea what this is, or I have to learn this thing from scratch. I just want to hear your thoughts, each of your thoughts on that.
Nick, do you want to
Yeah.
start with what you already knew?
Well, I mean, I think, I mean, from the what we already knew standpoint, we were successful in a very crowded industry because we actively engaged with our user community, and not just our user community, our prospects, right? Because obviously we started with 0 customers, but we learned this through our experience. We learned it working in ed tech in the education realm, like Marni was talking about earlier. We understood how to communicate with people to get them to tell us exactly what they want. And we understood, obviously, Krish, in a software environment, I would assume that you're a believer in iterative development, right? Not delivering this behemoth, a year from now, but we literally launched with an editable spreadsheet. We ended up being a customer success solution, right? But we got something out so quickly, and then just immediately engaged and interacted with the community of thousands and thousands of small and medium-sized businesses to help us grow the product exactly the way they think the product should work. So we didn't spend a ton of time. We did time initially with due diligence and just the concept of the idea, but we didn't dump all of our money into just understanding what the end gold solution needed to look like. We got something out the door quickly, and we iterated constantly, and we constantly got feedback from our customer base. So much so that the company that ended up acquiring us, which was several hundred people, and we were like 10% of that size, said, what did they say, Marni? What was their line in terms of us kicking their tails?
They said, when I asked them what surprised them about us, they said, well, I had to explain to my board yesterday how 7 of you are kicking 140 of our tails because, we didn't see that coming. We assumed that there were at least 25 of you, or 40 of you, based on the way the community was talking about our product. So yeah, that was a fun, and they were a competitor of ours, the folks who acquired us. So that was fun for them to say. And they've said it out loud in public. We're not talking, tales out of school type of thing.
Absolutely.
I think, so, what Nick said is very true. What we were very good at already was building relationships and communicating, which I don't think, to your point, when you're used to software building, like, oh, I just have to build a product. you don't think about all of the human elements that really come into play in building a business. The things we didn't know were all of the elements of how much time, money should we be spending on operations versus sales versus marketing versus R&D, et cetera. I can remember having a sticky note that I'm pointing right where it sat for the longest time. Like, okay, sales should be X% of my budget. Marketing should be this percent of the budget. This should be, on finance and general admin. We certainly spent time. I mean, the whole marketing component we had to figure out from a business perspective. I joke that I sold pre-calculus to 16-year-olds, but I already had the market. My prospects were forced to sit in front of me,
Right.
which does not happen in clearly, the business world. So we had to learn all of those pieces.
Kind of along those lines, and we talk about this as we are launching new ventures. We not only have the book Lead It Like Lasso, but a masterclass. We're building a whole brand and company following the same principles that we have in the book. But for those founders who haven't been through the process, the whole notion of exiting, right? Selling your company, right? What you quickly learn is, you go through due diligence that have, pages upon pages upon pages of, documents that you need to provide that talk about how the business is run and how it operates. And these are available. There's generic templates online for these things. But for those that are just starting out in the business, one of our core pieces of advice would be find due diligence checklists, right? And the way you operate and run your business, document it, because those things are important. They are important, especially if at some point you do want to exit your business, and to have processes and workflows that have the end in mind is not only is that important in how you live life personally, but from a business standpoint, that is something in whatever new business that Marni and I are involved with, we will establish out of the gate, because it will help when you finally get there, but it also helps you get from point A to point Z as you go along the process.
And that's, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, Nick, it's really two-pronged. First is the vision for the company, right? Have what you want that exit to look like, but also in the same way that you have agile iterative development in engineering, you have agile iterative development in the way your business processes mature. So we started with a very scaled down, like the kindergarten version of like the spreadsheet where we manually hand entered each item we purchased the first month into our budgeting spreadsheet, up until when we had a full system and an accountant that was, doing our books for us. But we started small and iterated, so we didn't overbuild our business process and we didn't overbuild our product. We iterated the whole way.
Okay, so Nick mentioned iterative, and Marni, you followed that up. But Marni, you mentioned sales and marketing, right? So two things I want to touch upon a little bit. Let's start with sales and marketing, because iterative is very important, but I understand that a bit more than I understand sales, Nick. So sorry, I'm going to go to Marty and talk just sales for a tiny bit, and please feel free to chime in as well. So when we started the company, like I said, engineering was at the top of minds. We're like, you know what? We're going to run into difficult engineering problems. How are we going to solve that? And that's going to be our only difficult problem. A weekend, we realized, you know what? Sure, it's a problem, but somehow we get the feeling, the gut tells you that this is not the most difficult thing we're going to continue to run into. There's going to be many different things. And boy, over the years, the list of things, the idea behind the initial podcast and publishing was just sharing the experience of how do you create a campaign on Facebook's campaign manager? How do you deal with LinkedIn's campaigns? How are they all different from each other? Even though things seem to be quote unquote consistent, they're targeting audience and demographic and whatnot. We were not used to it. We didn't know what prospecting was, whether you send out emails singularly, go to LinkedIn, the whole nine yards, right? So Marni, what is it, sales and marketing? If you could just, in your words, a high level introduction to a lot of founders that I know, even personally, understand engineering, But if you ask them to tell the difference between sales and marketing, they wouldn't exactly be, they'll be like, yeah, this is sales, it's marketing, but it's pretty gray area. But you bucket that into a single circle and it all sounds like it's the same thing. There's no difference between pre-sales, sales, and marketing, but we know that they are all very different from each other. So
They
where
are.
should we start understanding sales and marketing?
So first, the bigger picture is connecting with your ideal client and the problem that they have, right? So that's the big idea of sales and marketing is you're going to identify who's got this problem, clearly establish you have a solution to the problem, and you're going to sell them the problem. So the marketing is the high level, let's make sure the world knows about our product. And then sales is having a way to get them from understanding that they have a problem and you have the solution to actually purchasing. So the marketing is how you brand, how you communicate, how, and the process for that. So it might be on social media, it might be through email campaigns, etc. And the sales is the actual commitment, right? And depending on how large of a dollar, cost your product is, that can be from, like Nick said, we didn't have a sales team versus an enterprise sales team where you have a several $1,000s a month type of company. So that can be much, that certainly we have worked in those companies as well, can have a lot more meat on the bones in terms of what needs to happen. But it is really all about communicating and getting to show your ideal client that you're connecting the dots and so that they will purchase the solution. Did you want to dig into either of those more, or was that short?
No, that's a great start. I'm going to ask, for Nick's opinion, but Nick, I'm going to add one more thing to that, whatever Marni shared there, to make your life a little bit more difficult, right? So that's awesome. That's sales, that's marketing. Nick mentioned iterative development. Don't wait for a year before you go live. Just get constant feedback, build small, go to market sooner.
Yep.
Now, if for an engineer or a developer and architect, Nick was thinking, I know how to write code, build software. I'm going to build this beautiful piece of software. Why should I worry about sales? I mean, why is it even important? And I ask this question, it's a rhetorical question. We did not understand or appreciate the importance of that when we started. So I'm just making it sillier than the honest question is. But if you could just share your thoughts on why something Marni said about sales and marketing, why is it important?
Well, I mean, because it's the sales is the lifeblood of your company, right? I mean, you've heard the phrase, I presume, if you don't grow, you die, right? You need sales to keep feeding the engine, to keep investing in whatever it is you actually need to build to make it better, to keep evolving. It's such an obvious answer to me. I don't feel like I'm doing this response justice.
No, I know. I'll do the part where I make it. I didn't articulate this well enough. My bad. So when we started, we're like, what? We're going to focus all of our energies in the near future on building software. Like, in other words, not necessarily underappreciating sales, but simply not thinking about it, because we thought this is the most important thing to do now. Get the software, get it going, and then we'll worry about sales later. And in hindsight, I know, at least for our first product, and we've learned a little bit since, hopefully, that was not necessarily the best approach, where sales had to be part and parcel of your initial process as you get going. So my question was mostly from, not that sales is not necessarily important or we didn't recognize it, but why is it not a follow-up to a product, and why should it be in conjunction as the product is being built?
Well, I think because sales are the impetus for your continuous feedback loop, and you're in what we talked about with your iterative development, right? So you focus on sales. You're interested as an engineer. You're interested in more people using your solution, your platform, your product, whatever you're selling, because that then in turn keeps providing feedback for you to build a better platform. And as an owner of the company, that's what you're looking for, right? You're looking to, I'm not sure if you've ever read the book, The Go Giver by Bob Burg, right? But he he has this law of value, which is your true worth is determined by how much more that you give in value than you take in payment. And that is a principle that Marty and I and our whole team at Lifecycle Insights at other company, we live by. It was value, and you deliver value by getting it in the hands of your customer, listening to their feedback, and then making your product better. So that would be my answer to that question.
And I would even add that right out of the gate, by having a focus on sales, ensures you're building the right product to start with, right? There are plenty of folks that build products and they go nowhere because they didn't validate the problem in the space. They didn't check to see if anybody wanted to pay to solve the problem, for that matter, right? So sales helps to marketing, communicating. You said you blog, right? By doing that, you get to be the thought leader. You become a trusted authority. People buy from folks that they know, follow, and trust and like, right? And so marketing is a way to get a brand that folks know, like, and trust. So they will buy from you.
You know, Marnie, you said validation. That's such an important point. So I want to ask you to talk a bit more about validation. One of the founders I talked to recently, he said it very well. He said, sometimes, as a founder, you try to get validation. You send it to your sibling, your friend, your coworkers from the past, and everyone's like, you know what, this Krish, this is awesome. He said that's less validation, more sympathy, right? They're just doing it for you. They tried it.
Yeah.
So Marnie, the question I have is validation, a founder, early stage startup, how do they go about finding that validation? If you could just take an example of, what you folks have built, where did you find that validation and what were some of the challenges that you had to address as you've tried to find validation?
So one of our business partners was a managed service provider, and we knew that was our target market. So we got him to connect us, and we started with five folks that Nick and I didn't know, and they didn't know us. They weren't our friends. They weren't going to give us an attaboy for the sake of an attaboy. We just wanted to talk to them and ask them if this was a problem they had and how they were currently solving that problem. And the really important piece of the end of that conversation is, if we solve that for you, would you pay for it? It is really important to find out if someone is willing to pay to solve that problem. I have a lot of problems that I can solve manually, and many, many of them I wouldn't pay to have them solve for me because the juice wouldn't be worth the squeeze. So it's really important. So we found strangers, and I believe the magic number is, like, if you're looking at benchmarking how your product is doing, getting from 0 to 1 is the first, but to have 10 paying and then to have 100 strangers in your product are benchmarks to say, this is the right, I have validated the product market fit for this product.
Perfect. It makes sense. Nick, you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I would just say, once we got to that level of 100, then we took that validation to the next level. We got heavily involved within community peer groups where we would actually go and sit in a room with 20 of our ideal candidates, our ideal client profiles, and we would talk through our solution. We would measure, okay, not only would you pay for it, but why would you pay for it? How is this a return on your investment? So we started out very small, like Marnie said, with those 5 strangers. And as we grew and scaled as a company, we just upped our level of validation by speaking to bigger and bigger audiences, just to make sure that not only was our initial product meeting the need, but then as we started to add modules to our platform, that those modules went through that same sort of validation process.
I'm going to share my screen here because, I sometimes it's easier for me and I think I've had feedback that to visualize what we're talking about. I don't draw very well. I just use a quick tool to do it. So I'm just going to capture the essence of what we've talked about so far, right? Listening and capturing notes is not my skill. So my apologies if I missed something here, but there are some brilliant points that the two of you mentioned that I don't want to forget here, right? So it's not in any particular order. So I'm going to write validation was one item. We talked a little bit about, we'll go into the details. Sales was another. And I think Nick mentioned, iterative development. I know why that's so tiny there.
Itty bitty.
Yeah, iterative development. Oops. My apologies. I'm doing it as fast as I can do it here. Okay.
Yeah.
Group it. Okay. That's one. Okay. And then we talked, I think Nick also mentioned about return on investment, right? ROI. Okay. These are some of the items we've talked about. I want to keep adding to this list as we go. I think just to reiterate what you just what you said, Marni, and what Nick also mentioned there, right? Validation is very important. I can say this, when we built our first product, that's not something we thought about. It's like a couple of few developers are like, you know what, let's start building. We have a problem in mind. If we have a problem, sure, the rest of the world should have the exact same problem. And if we want to solve it this way, sure, the rest of the world would want to solve it the exact same way. And we might be willing to pay for it. Sure, everybody else in the world would be willing to pay for it. As it turned out, we got a lot of those answers wrong. I would have said all answers wrong. It'll just make me feel really bad on a podcast. So I'm just saying we got a lot of those answers wrong. And now, over the years, as we've built more, we've realized the importance of validation. We've realized the importance of all of these things. But before we get into the next item, I want to ask a little bit more about the pain in being able to validate. It's not that people I talk to do not know that you need to validate whatever it is that you're building. The process and how you go about doing it is where the execution is where things appear to fall flat. It's not so much that people are like, okay, I have no clue that I'm supposed to do this. No. I know I'm supposed to do this. I just don't know if I'm doing this right, or what are some good ways of doing it. What are some ways that are, maybe you might think about doing it those ways, but they may not be the best ways to do it, right? So I want to hear both your thoughts on what are some good ways to validate, and what are some not so good ways to validate.
Well, I want to go first because I want to say that one of Nick's superhero powers is he listens really well. And that is quickly followed up by another one of his superhero powers, which is he asks great questions. So I think it is really important when you are talking to a potential prospect, so a stranger, where you want to validate your problem, to not project your own assumptions and ideas on them. You can turn them into that yes person that you were mentioning, right? And it's no different than having your brother-in-law have the conversation with you. If you're just leading them down the path you want them to go, where they're just taking the path of least resistance and they're all yeses. So I've seen Nick ask questions to make sure when you ask someone a question, their answer is their honest response of what they're thinking, not them just saying yes to whatever you had to say. So I think asking really important questions and listening carefully to the answer is step one. Nick, you want to add to that?
I mean, I think that is, I mean, I'm just going to reiterate that. I think it's so easy to, as you're trying to communicate your value, right? It's so easy to not ask the hard question. You know that you have warts or you're missing something, but you instead start asking questions about things that you do really well. And I think in every time that I've failed in the past, that has been I'm just reiterating what Barney said, that has been my failure, which is I'm not willing to be transparent and hear the hard feedback, the harsh criticisms, because it hurts, especially as a founder, right? You think you've put all this time in, you think you've architected this great solution. You don't really want to hear somebody, pick it apart and say, yeah, but. But that is the only way you get better. And until you realize that as you start talking about validation, until you start seeing things and detaching yourself from your product and seeing things from somebody else's perspective, or attempting to see it from your competitor's perspective, right? Then you're you're really not validating what you're bringing to market.
Nick,
At least not in an efficient way.
were you saying Jocko Willink was like detachment was his number one superhero power? Does he be able to stand out outside of his own product?
Yeah, and see it from other people's perspective, and not be biased by your own personal perspective.
Okay. And a follow-up to that, Nick, is who should we, the question is, if I can draw this, who, we know we need to ask these honest questions. Don't take it personally because, you want to get real feedback. But who should we be asking these questions to? In other words, it varies by the product. I understand that whether it's B2B, B2C, but in general, there is also this confusion about, okay, you know what, I might be asking the right questions, but not to the right set of people. So how do we go past that? How does a founder find out or ask themselves who those questions should be directed to get the best answers?
Yeah, I think there's two perspectives that you always have to look at, right? The first is, whatever role is actually taking advantage of your solution, your offering, right? But that's not always the only person that you're talking to, right? In our world, in our previous startup that we had sold, right? That person was often very different than the decision maker, right? The one who carried the purse strings. So from our perspective, there were typically three roles that we would work with. One was the decision maker, the general manager of the company, the owner of the company, whoever it might be, right? There was the account manager because it was a customer success solution. They were delivering quarterly business reviews, right? And then there was the technical VCIO because they offered VCIO services. We had found ourselves to identify, and Marnie and I didn't realize this when we first got into this business because we knew nothing about it, right? But, we quickly realized that there were three gatekeepers that needed to validate our offering. And as you said, Krish, that changes depending on whatever business that you're in, right? When we were in ed tech, it was completely different. It was a completely different set of stakeholders, but it was multiple stakeholders. But unless, if you're really going to be successful, your product has to pass the sniff test with every stakeholder that could block it from our perspective. Marnie, answer that?
No, you answered it brilliantly. But my follow-up question to that is the gatekeeper, another important word here that I've learned. How do you identify who those the answer could be, the honest answer, even if you can say it, could be, well, Marnie and Nick are smart people, so they could tell. But if you have to make it verbalize that to say, how do you go about figuring out who those people might be? Because it's not necessarily obvious who the gatekeepers are, because your product idea is fluid. You're building something iteratively. So it's a moving platform. Your solution itself is a moving platform, which means there is no direct proportionality to who the gatekeepers are. Those gatekeepers are going to be fluid as well. Does that make sense? And if that is the case, how do we go about identifying, if you're a developer, the only way you think is you try to make everything a binary, and not everything in life is zeros and ones. But that's sometimes, that's at least the way I think, is I want to get these quantitative answers, and then finally you struggle and figure out, Krish, too bad, the answer is very subjective, right? But I still want to hear it from sort of the horse's mouth, if you will. How the question to both of you, right, Marnie and Nick, is gatekeepers, completely agreed. How do we figure out who those gatekeepers are? And is that a fluid set, or would you say, nope, there has to be a concrete set of gatekeepers? If they are fluid, it means you're not sure what you're building.
I think there are conceptual ideas and then like up close personal ones for a specific product. So conceptually, you need to think about who is your product for and who is the buyer of that product. And that is, in the sales and marketing world, they talk about user personas, right? In the product world, you talk about who the user personas are, but you need to do the buyer persona as well. So who are the buyers of the product? So the decision maker and the budget holder are always two of the gatekeepers, because they obviously can block you. The end user is also, when Nick mentioned ed tech, you would have a superintendent that's the final check writer. But you would probably have some department head or maybe an assistant superintendent that's in charge of the program that the product's for. But the end user is the teacher. And even though the teacher's not got anything to do with signing the check for it, if they hate it, it's not going to be implemented. So you need somebody all along the buyer journey as well as the user journey. Those are, I think, that's the first thing that came to mind for me. Nick,
And
how far off am I?
No, I think you're dead on it. I think you're right, Krish. It is fluid, right? It's you can in our world we had an idea of the roles that we had to hit for all of those things, but there was always anomalies, right? It was never 100% true that these are the people, um, but that's what we tried to do. Where I was going to go is that's what we tried to do with our marketing efforts with our company, right? Is we would try to talk to each constituent, each stakeholder, right, based off of different personas. And a big part of our success was we realized going in, even though we had never worked in the managed IT services space before, right? We had worked in customer success. We had worked in, in the SaaS business. We worked in data reporting analytics. Our one of our primary objectives or primary reasons for our success was that we created thought leadership, right? We created thought leadership around how and why you're going to get a return on investment for doing the types of things that our product did. And within that thought leadership, we would have a message for the buyer. We'd have a message for the end user, right? We'd have a message for that department level decision maker. And were we perfect all the time? Absolutely not, right? But we gave ourselves a huge head start by kind of laying the groundwork through our thought leadership, where we spoke to each one of those perspectives to get them to the table to talk to us, and then eventually get to the validation and use of the product and platform.
The number of things the two of you have mentioned so far. One, I'm not succinct, and two, unfortunately, a lot of stuff, which means I'll have to have multiple podcasts to cover the gamut of what you're talking about here, which is true in many cases. I'm going to probably follow up because there's a lot of items that we hit upon, which is actually a topic in itself, right? We're talking ROI, we're talking validation, we're talking a number of these things. It's not just an English word. You have to live through the pain of digesting that, messing up multiple times if you're like us, and then hopefully learning a little bit from there. But of all the things you mentioned the last few minutes, both Martin and Nick, leadership was a word that you said more than once. That I think is a good segue, even though I have a few follow-up questions of what you just said, a good segue to the book, right? So let me share the screen. So I want to just quickly show the chapters on that book here. Let me go get that. I'm going to go to I think I saw the...
Oh, that'll pop up the chapters to our masterclass, which are similar. So we certainly can speak to that.
Okay.
All good.
Yep. Sure. Here, I want to ask about, let me phrase my question this way, right? Leadership, personal leadership. Now, let's say I'm a startup founder. It's typically solopreneurs or two people generally getting started with what they're doing. Let me stop sharing for a second. Let's say the question is, I have an idea. Everybody has 10 ideas. So how good is an idea that's not implemented, right? So I have to worry about implementing it, seeing through to fruition, executing it. A lot of these things are important. We maybe have a team of 2 people, 3 people, whatever that number is. And that number is a lot smaller from what I've seen in the US. When you, my experience is limited to the US. So my apologies to folks watching from elsewhere. I could be wrong. But in general, I've seen that the teams that I've worked with in other parts of the world happen to be a little bit bigger for solving the same problems. We seem to be perennially understaffed for whatever reason. Yeah. Maybe there's not enough money, or maybe there's too much to do, whatever be the reason. So the question is, okay, if I ask it intentionally, so this way, saying, why is leadership important? There's like 2 people. There's me, my partner, there's maybe 3 people. Let's say engineering is the most important thing, Marni and Nick. Leadership is not important, at least not initially. Maybe we'll worry about it 6 months down the road. I know it sounds wrong even when I say it, but can you please tell us why it's wrong?
Well, I think whether it is intentional or spoken about, you are leading yourself, even if you're just party of one. So we believe that everyone is a leader. Leadership is life is our rule number one. And you can lead in a boardroom, in a locker room, in a classroom, in your living room, in your small office, party of one. So you are in fact leading yourself. And if you don't have a plan for where you're going and you're just going to start to build, you're not even leading yourself well.
And then, I would add to that, right? A lot of a big chunk of what we talk about is, leading authentically. Because you don't want to, starting up a new business, it's like this big carrot that's being dangled saying, make the wrong decision, make the unethical decision, right? Because it's life or death sometimes, you feel like, right? And, we talk a lot about making sure that you really spend the time doing self-reflection to understand what motivates you, what drives you. And that's ultimately where you need to go. Because if that's not where you go, then you're not going to be happy. At minimum, you're going to be stressed and anxious about it, right? So to Marnie's point, everybody's a leader. Yeah, you're right. You don't have to worry if you're a 2, 3, 4 person team. You don't necessarily have to worry about the classic, leading a team type of mindset. But eventually you want to get there because you want to grow and you want to scale. But until you get there, you should make sure that at the very minimum, you're leading yourself. You're thinking about whatever legacy that you're going to leave behind with this product or this platform or this organization or company that you're starting. Because the end in mind is really important. Similar to that due diligence checklist we talked about. Just apply it to leadership. But we also talk about the notion of relying on your support network and networking. As a small business, that's critical to getting brand awareness and exposure, because you never know. Obviously, it's critical to get some exposure, but there are amplifiers out there. And if you can build a network that can amplify what you do, that is only going to help you get in front of more people to do all the things that we talked about in this call. And, in terms of validation or sales and marketing, what have you. So to us, technology is great, sales and marketing, all that stuff is good. Validation is good. But having a framework to lead either yourself, a small team, or a bigger team, to us is the biggest pitfall that we see with people who are trying to kind of start their own business, because it is so easy to get off track. And we believe that having a framework to kind of lead yourself and those around you is what keeps you kind of anchored and guide rails to that path and journey that you're on.
Okay, so I was going to ask a question, but based on what Nick just said there, I highlighted this on the screen. I'm not sharing it right now, but one of the things on your page says, we've seen the good, the bad, and the ugly of leadership, right? I want to ask, what is an example of something that's ugly? That I want to forget about the good for a second. I want to talk about the bad and the ugly. Sorry, go ahead, Marni.
The ugly gives good counterexamples, which makes it really clear. We're all about, like, when you see ugly, you know not to do that again. And Nick mentioned a bit of the ugly early on is when we got acquired for the third time, right? They were telling us their core values was we want raving fans as customers, and they kept pulling all of the money, financial resources, and human resources away from helping us support customer success. So it was that clash of core values where they said one thing, but the culture and the outcomes were the other. Anytime that clash happens, that is ugly when it comes to leadership. You say one thing, you do the other.
And Nick, anything you want to add to that?
I mean, I will say that I was at one time an ugly leader, right? Early in my mid to late 20s, I was promoted to a vice president of consulting services. I was an accidental leader, right? I was really good at data analysis and managing projects and managing clients. So I was promoted into a leadership position that led people, and I didn't really know how to do it, right? And my response was not to listen to people, it was to tell people what to do, right? My response was to be completely and solely focused on outcomes and not about development of teams and people. So I think, there's this whole notion of traditional leadership, which was really popular back in the 80s and 90s, which is all about command and control, right? And then in the last 10 to 15 years, it's all been about servant leadership, right? Growing your teams, being empathetic, listening. I think the traditional leadership is bad leadership, and I think it's proven to be that over time. And good leadership is all about growth and development of your teams, and that's what servant leadership is all about. That's what we talk
So,
about.
this is maybe a delicate question. If it's difficult to answer, we can go to the next one, but I'm going to ask regardless. We live in a world that's sometimes more divided than most all of us would like for it to be, right? For whatever reason that 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 separation of thoughts is there. And when you're building software, you're thinking, what, I'm building something that is run on the machine, and it's the compiler, right? The compiler doesn't discriminate. It takes Krish's code the same way as it takes Marnie's code or Nick's code, for instance. But before you write that code with or without the help of bots, say with a fair bit of help from bots these days, it still needs to be written so far by a human for the most part, right? We're not there yet where Musk's humanoids are there to replace possibly. So there is this human interaction that's needed, no matter how big or small the team is. And then there is remote work. Things are changing back to, sometimes people being forced to come back to work. That's a different story, a different discussion. But what I'm trying to get to the gist here is it's a big world out there. Software can be built by anybody sitting anywhere, as long as everyone understands the purpose, has the same amount of passion, the drive, and the commitment to building it. Leadership, if everybody was located in my whole team was in Northern Virginia. We went to office in Reston. We saw them every day. We came to work Monday through Friday. Probably there's a certain type of leadership that might work, which may not work if none of us literally see each other other than through video calls. And we're building software from different parts of the world. So there's cultural learning, there's human elements, there's different models like full-time, contractors, part-time. All of this makes software more challenging than maybe it needs to be, but that's just, you build better software because you have more people helping you out. So how do we not become bad leaders, even if we are not bad people? Like there is a separation between I'm a good person, but maybe my leadership skills are not on par with me as a person. I mean, hopefully, I know I sometimes say a lot of words, and my wife reminds me. But hopefully, if I didn't, the essence of the question was not lost. Marnie and Nick, I would like to get your thoughts on that.
Well, I think one thing that comes to mind is, first, you can learn leadership, right? So the studies show that about 70% of leadership can be learned. All right. 30% of the folks have some natural leadership skills, but leadership can in fact be learned. So people should be working toward improving those skills. And those leadership skills are character skills. And that is what we talk about in the book. That is what Leading It Like Lasso is all about. And one of the top skills is communication. So everything that you talked about there, all over the map, can be solved with communication. And one of the activities that we have folks do is create their own communication guide to help describe to others how it is easiest to communicate with you. Because when you have a better understanding of folks, of how you yourself operate and how others operate, it's less likely to cause that clash that you mentioned. Like, there's a lot of disparity in the world, but if we can communicate and aim to understand each other, Nick and I talk a lot about the book Think Again by Adam Grant. If you can communicate and think again, there are ways to get past it, regardless of your business setup.
Nick?
I think to your point, Krish, I think, there are plenty of good people who don't make great leaders, and to marry both of those points together, you said that, Krish, and then Marnie said it's something you have to learn, and you have to work at, you have to put the time in. I'll quote Adam Grant again, the author. He talks about the fact that we're in the midst of a character revolution, right? With technology and automation all around us. And you spoke to this, Krish. Anybody can write code these days, and really there's caveats to that. Clearly, you have to have the mindset, you have to have the logic, you have to have the idea, you have to instruct it. But in general, technical skills are becoming commoditized somewhat, right? And it's becoming harder and harder to stand out. And I think at the same time, given our society, right, character skills have taken a back seat over the last 10 to 15 years. Decency, transparency, authenticity,
Empathy.
and empathy. And so what Marnie and I firmly believe, right, we could have done anything when we sold our business, right? We believe that 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 character skills, leadership skills, is really what's going to help anybody, but more specifically, this young generation that's about to hit the job market, that's in college right now, or they're early in their careers. It's important to put the time in and put the work in to develop your character, your leadership skills, because that's truly what's going to make you stand out and differentiate yourselves in an ever crowded field with all the help that technology is giving everybody to kind of level out the playing field.
Nick, you said, I was smiling because I couldn't agree more. But then I also thought about the reaction of all the developers who are going to watch this. Nick said technology skills are being commoditized, and that's so true. Yet, there is this phase we are in right now where even me, when I wear my developer hat, I'm going to be like, nope, Nick, I don't agree. And then when I wear the other hat, I'm going, you know what, I don't want to agree with what Nick said, but I have to agree because that is kind of true. And I have a few other things to talk about there, but again, I'm going to have to bring you folks back because there's a lot of things that I one thing is I'm not sussing, but two, there is just plenty of information here that's on the table to talk about, right? But let me just say one more thing to what Nick just mentioned. I watched an interview of Billy Bob Thornton recently. He's one of my favorite actors. I mean, I love Billy Bob, where he said when he was younger, he was waiting tables in LA or in a party where a lot of these Hollywood actors would show up, and I think what I'm going to paraphrase. I can barely paraphrase anybody, and now you're trying to paraphrase like Billy Bob here, right? He said, he was talking to somebody who was like, not too tall, but he was very big in the industry, and he was like a producer or someone like that. He had said, "Hey, are you looking to become an actor?" And Billy Bob's like, "Oh my God, how did you find out?" He goes, "You're not alone. Everybody who's waiting here, they all want to become an actor. So that's not something, it's not a revelation. But I'll tell you one thing that you need to have to become an actor." He's like, "Oh, is it acting skills? Is it one of those things?" He goes, "No, you need to know how to write. Because everybody here wants to become an actor. You're never going to be able to stand out if all that you bring to the table is acting. You're going to have to start writing." And then he later names the person who had said that. Sorry, it just skips my mind. I don't know who that person. It's not it's not Danny DeVito. It's not, but it's someone else that he had mentioned. And I think it's important because you have to find a way to differentiate yourself, right? Everything that you've said here is super important. Yet, if you looked at it with a negative connotation, by negative, what I mean is, hey, is this something I would not have known if I've gone to college, I'm starting a company. All of this should be fairly obvious to me. But one thing I can say is the meanings of those words could be obvious sometimes, but you have to digest the actual. I blame it on English. I'm not a native English speaker, so I'm going to blame it on that. I'm not able to articulate this exactly the way I want to do it. But what I'm trying to say is the words mean something, and we get the essence, meaning of those. But the essence of those words and those sentences, you've got to sometimes live through the pain and digest it to know, oh, you know what? When Nick said technology is being commoditized, or when Marnie said sales and the types of leadership, what is ugly leadership, one day this founder, the person who's watching it, listening to it, be like, oh my God, this is what they meant when they said that. And I say that because it's happened to me. It happens to me all the time. I have this conversation, and then a few weeks or months down the road, I was like, oh my God, didn't that podcast guest mention the same thing? Krish, why did you make that mistake? Because you're not the smart one that learns from other people's mistakes, but at least don't be stupid enough to not be able to learn from your own mistakes, right? So this is Amazing. What you've said here is like phenomenal. I know we've used up the hour. Before we go to your closing comments and before I find a way to bring you folks back to the podcast, uh, I ask a customary non-technical question to all my guests. I'm going to ask you that. But before I did that, each of you or any of you have any question that you may want to ask me?
I think of a couple questions I may want to ask you, right? But they're probably really long answers. I'm more interested in the whole back end as a service, and what that means and how that's going. I just have a lot of questions about the business that I don't have answers to, but probably too long to talk about here.
No
But feel
worries.
free to share.
No,
Yeah.
I will. Marnie, anything that you want to ask?
I didn't have all the right words that Nick did, but I had the same question. I was like, I would love to hear more about all of your companies, but yeah, go on.
Okay, I will say it quickly. I'll just do a screen share. That way, you guys, let me go back here. You do have another 5 minutes, right, Marnie and Nick?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Okay, awesome. So I'm going to go here really quick, right? Actually, let me start here. Just give you a quick background. So we launched our first web application like about, I want to say like 5 years ago, right? We went live with our web application. It's a project management platform that we launched. We were using different tools. It just didn't do what we wanted. So we started building one, and this is it. It's a full-blown project management platform, right? And I'm just going to do a couple of clicks here for what it's worth. I want to go to NVIDIA because, the earnings are good. We talked, we didn't talk as much about AI, but we will in the next conversations. I think the earnings are coming out on Wednesday. So, who knows? But anyway, so this is our first product that we built. You think about any type of project management and you can find a lot of what you would expect, plus many things that we brought new to the table, problems we try to solve. We built this, we want to showcase two things. And let's assume what those two things are, right? Let's say I want to showcase this Kanban view, for instance. But to get to this point, Nick and Marnie, it took us a bit of time, a lot longer than we would have liked for it, because we didn't have foundational elements, right? We were iterative, but we had to build a lot of the foundational elements to get here. And that was not something we had planned for when we started building it. So this is one of our learning, right? I want to talk about a number of our learnings, which is, hey, how difficult is it to build Kanban? Well, it's not difficult, but it's not very easy either. But we need a library to integrate. We need to build functionality. We need data. What do we stub out? What do we not do it? We built everything. We built a sign up page, a sign in page. We took you beautifully into this lovely castle. But we didn't want to prove any of that to the end user. We just want to prove that once you enter this lovely Windsor Castle in UK, you have this room. But we, as engineers, didn't know how fast to build to get the user into that room. So those were some of our initial challenges, right? And then we had a responsive mobile app, meaning you were able to use it on your mobile, but not a native app. We thought it was okay, right? And when you don't have something, the end user always somehow they find a way to point to the one thing that you don't have. And there's always that one thing. Or they're like, oh, great, you have a web. If there's no native mobile app, that's no good. So we changed our focus to, instead of improving the features on this platform at the time, we ended up building mobile apps. So we have a mobile app on App Store and Play Store, which supports 75% of what you do here. So now we did that. We launched it. And then they were like, oh, you don't have a scheduler. We need that. Oh, you don't have this. You don't have. So we kept adding more and more features. And the mistake, let me stop sharing, what we did, I think, was, as we learned along the way, is you cannot satisfy every user. You cannot go build a feature just because Nick wants something, Marnie wants something, Krish wants something, and tomorrow Nick wants something else, Marnie wants something else, and Krish wants something else. We kept building it because it was developers and we were able to do that, but that doesn't mean we should have done that, right? That was a certain mistake. I cannot not admit these mistakes. It'd be ridiculous to not admit those mistakes. And then what we did was, okay, we were quick, but it took us a little bit longer to build this because we didn't have the foundational elements. So what we did, Nick, is we basically, and Marnie, is we repurposed our APIs and we made them public, right? So we had private APIs. We made those APIs public and we re-provisioned them on different places. One is the AWS marketplace and different API hubs. And now people can go build applications using our APIs in quicker time, right? So if you go building blocks, you can go subscribe to it or get a license or whatnot. And then I'll go to the developers.snowplow.com. You go to API reference. Oops. You go to the API reference and you see you can pick up whatever endpoints that you want to use. We have like 1,500 endpoints that we support across 8 different APIs. So now we build the foundational elements and we give the backend system, make it available to people to build their web and mobile apps in much quicker time or server-side systems, something that we didn't have available for us, right? But this is not a product we had started to build on day one. We didn't even anticipate making our APIs public. And the one other thing we learned along the way was you have to be open. And what I think Nick mentioned, and Marnie, you seconded that, which is you can't become too attached to what you're building because, oh, I spent time and money building it. So Nick and Marnie have to use this thing. It doesn't make sense for them to not use it, right? You can't shove anything down anyone's throats. As engineers who had built software for other companies, we didn't know this. This is an obvious thing for me today, right? And that's why I mentioned earlier, these words are obvious. If someone told me 5 years ago, Krish, just because you like it, someone else is not going to like it, I'd be like, yeah, of course I know this. Why do you need to tell me? No, I didn't know it because we made those mistakes, right? We made those very same mistakes and we built more platforms. And now we have a course platform. Like we create courses. This conversation that we have, I will talk to you folks offline. There's a lot of learning that comes out of this. Anything that's not on the book that you're willing to share in a podcast, I would love to capture it because this is learning. And people have told, they come back and say, you know what, I saw this and I made that one mistake lesser. My hope here is, Marnie and Nick, is people watching this, listening to it, is learn from two people who've done this many times. They've written a book on it. Go buy the book. By the way, just before I forget, where should folks go to buy? Do they have to go to like Amazon to buy the book, I presume?
Amazon, yep. Lead it like
Okay.
lasso, Amazon.
Okay, I'm just going to share it one more time just so I don't forget. So they can either go here or they can also search and just.
So Amazon's the easy path.
Lead it like lasso. Yep. They would go
There
here
it
to
is.
buy the book. Perfect, right? So you go there to buy the book, and you mentioned a lot of books that you'd referenced as well. So if I'll try to find the transcript and make add them as legends or something, so people can look that up too. The question I was going to ask you is the non-technical question is, what is your comfort food? Like Marnie, we can start with you and then go to Nick. I ask this to all my podcast guests. Like, what do you, like someone woke you up in the middle of the night, or doesn't matter, a good dinner. What is your most favorite dish?
Oh gosh, Nick, go. Well, I say.
I'm going to say it's an asada taco. You give me that, I'm happy. So.
Oh, that's funny. I was thinking shrimp taco.
Nick, can you say that one more time slowly, please?
An asada taco.
Okay.
ASADA, asada taco. It's kind of like a steak and cilantro, and what's the sauce, Marnie?
The salsa.
Yeah, the green salsa.
Oh, salsa verde.
Salsa verde. Thank you. That's.
Oh, okay. Okay, so people can look it up. I'm vegetarian but borderline vegan, so I don't know if this one is, but people can look up asada tacos, right? I didn't even know that. That is a new word to me. And Marnie, how about you?
So I will not pick a taco since Nick did. If I was going to say shrimp taco, but I will say a tuna poke bowl. A good tuna poke bowl.
Oh no, I'm going to share my screen again because these are very difficult dishes. Looks like. Sorry, how do you spell it?
Poke.
Oh, okay, tuna poke bowl. Okay, awesome. That looks good. That does look good.
What's your comfort food, Krish?
So I've lived most of my life here now, but I grew up in the southern part of India, in a state called Tamil Nadu. I grew up in Chennai. That's the name of the city. So it's like I don't know if you've seen the crepe. It's called dosa, like DOSA. Let me share my screen just so you folks know if you don't know what that is. This one here. Yep. It's like it's a crepe. It's a breakfast dish. It's probably one of the most popular breakfast dishes in the part of the world I come from. So have you tried that before, any of you?
I have not, but we'll
Have
add it to the
not.
list. I look
Yeah.
forward to trying it. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, there are, if you're, unfortunately or fortunately, if you're in the US, you want to try good Indian food, you're mostly out of luck, right?
Yeah.
If you want to try the best Indian food, but you're not in India, I have two countries that I recommend. One is Singapore. They have fantastic South Indian food and it's amazing. But it's too far. The closest one is UK, right? You go to England, they have some
Yeah.
phenomenally good Indian food. Yeah,
I was just there a couple weeks ago. I should have. You're a couple weeks too late, but I'll go back.
Okay,
I
yeah,
will try
definitely
it there.
check it out. Yeah, the British spent a fair bit of time in India, so the food in England is just absolutely lovely. So that's all I had to. There's plenty to ask. I'm going to follow up. I'm going to include the links to your book on Amazon, your website, and LinkedIn profiles. If there's anything else that you want to include, I'm happy to do that as well. Just as a summary, folks, again, we talked to Marni Stockman and Nick Coniglio, co-authors of Lead It Like Lasso. Definitely check out the book on Amazon. Check out the website, and then hit them up on LinkedIn if you want to follow up. Sometimes you don't have to explain any bit more. We didn't know each other, but I know how much experience you bring to the table. It's phenomenal, and hopefully the ugly diagram I've captured. At least I want to capture like 5 or 6 words. If people forgot everything else, they can go back and look at leadership, go back and look at return on investment, on validation. Don't ask your friends and family, ask 5 strangers like Marni mentioned. Anything else you want to say as closing comments, Marni, and then Nick, and then we can call it wraps.
Oh, I just want to say thank you for having us. I enjoyed the conversation.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for being here.
Likewise, we very much appreciate the time. Thank you so much. This has been fun.
Awesome. We'll get this published and we'll talk soon. Thanks, both of you. And just stay there after I hit stop just so the recording uploads. Yep. Thanks.